I'm Maud Dahme. I am a survivor of the Holocaust. During the age of 6.5 to 9.5, my sister, who was 4.5, and I were hidden for 3 years. We lived in a city called Amersfoort in the Netherlands, where we lived with my parents. In May of 1940, one morning, Germany invaded the Netherlands. And for 5 days, the Dutch armed forces tried to fight this mighty German army. And on the 5th day, Hitler came in and bombed our biggest city of Rotterdam and said to the Dutch, if you do not surrender now, I'm going to bomb every city in the Netherlands. And the Dutch surrendered. And that's when it started for the Jews in the Netherlands. First, it was quiet, but it didn't take very long for regulations to start to come. There was one synagogue in our town, and the rabbi called the whole congregation together and read a letter. This was the spring of 1942 from the Nazi command to the Jews of Amersfoort. Wonderful news for you all. We're going to take you away from the war scene. We're going to have trains. We'll notify you when and where you can catch these trains. Trains will be going east. Fathers and mothers can get jobs. Children can continue their education. And everybody left and said, what? No city, no country, just east? So my parents snuck into a friend's house, and we were not allowed to visit our Christian friends. He was a Christian and I think a deputy mayor, and saw the letter, same letter on his desk. And my mother thought, oh my, is he collaborating with the Nazis? Or is he working for resistance? So she asked. His name was Case. How come you have this letter? And he said, I work for the resistance. And we have been working very hard with Christian families all over the Netherlands, asking them, would you take and hide Jewish children? They're our first priority. I have an address for your children. Would you be willing to send your children to a family who are willing to take your children? Can't tell you who they are or where they live. All he said was on a farm, and I have to know by tomorrow. My parents went home, and what a difficult decision to have to make, not knowing where your children are going, or if you'll ever see them again. My parents said yes. And I remember that afternoon, my mother sat me down and told me, you and your sister are going on a little vacation to a farm. Well, you're on your vacation, we're going on our vacation. So in a couple of weeks, we'll come by the farm and pick you up. We're so excited. We lived in the city to go to a farm. And my mother packed a little suitcase for each of us. And the next morning, my father, I remember, walked us to a house in the neighborhood. And we didn't know the family. And when we got to the house, my father handed me the little suitcases and said, take very good care of your little sister, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And they put us to bed there. But in the middle of the night, they woke us up and said, hurry up, get dressed. Because I realized now what had to happen. This gentleman, his name was Jan Canis, who I've also recognized at Yad Vashem as a righteous. He had to take us to this family on the farm because he was working for the resistance. And we couldn't leave from my hometown because everybody knew my sister and I. And the next morning, by daylight, we arrived in the next town, took a train, and we arrived on a farm. They didn't know what to do with us. 2 little girls in city clothes in an area where they spoke a dialect. They were dressed in native costumes, wooden shoes, and everything. Took us in the house. And this was a couple in their 60s, never had children, but deeply religious Christians. They sat me down that evening and said to me, we're going to tell you something that you must remember. No matter who asks you who you are, this is what you have to say. You are supposed to be our nieces who have been bombed out of a city, explaining our dress, our speech, because we had the city language. You cannot go to school here because we're afraid may talk to a classmate and say your real name or something about where you lived. And you have to call us aunt and uncle since you're our nieces. And in Dutch, uncle is oom and aunt is tante. But my sister couldn't say tante, called her Tannie. So all our lives, she was always Tannie. And you have to have our last name. Our last name is Spronk. And your first name is going to be Margie or Margie. And you have to stay in the house until you remember your name. And your sister, Rita, her name is Rita Spronk. But you can imagine for a 6.5-year-old to digest this and try to remember this. So they had to go out every day and work the fields, and we had to stay in the farmhouse till I remembered. Once I did, I don't know how long it took, but we were allowed to go out with them and work the fields all day. And then the only time we really were out was if we visited some relatives with them or if we went to church on Sundays. Uncle died one evening. We went into hiding. It was in the summer of 1942. And it was now January 1944. We had been out somewhere with visiting a relative and came in, and he was taking off his jacket and he went like this and he fell down at my feet. He had a heart attack and died. The resistance said we should leave because she couldn't run the farm and another address had to be found. And Tani said, no, she's going to keep us. We're going to stay with her, which we did. And it wasn't until right after Christmas in 1944 that we were taken away one day. Strange people came into the farmhouse and said we had to leave right now. Someone had revealed who we were and where we were. We were taken to another family in a fishing village, and we stayed with that family until the end of the war. It was decided we should return to aunt on the farm to wait to see if my parents survived. There was no contact for 3 years with my parents at all. The resistance, I found out after the war, did tell my parents we were still alive at times when there was contact between them seeing us on the farm or in the village or seeing my parents. My parents did survive. Friends hid them in their attic because my father could never go outside because he would be recognized. They were in their hometown. They were able to come to the farm after the war, and I didn't recognize them. So they stayed on the farm a little bit, and then I went up. And after a while, I went up to them and said, okay, we'll go home with you, but if we don't like you, we're going to come back and stay with Anne, not with you. And we went home with my parents, and we did stay with my parents. It was a very difficult adjustment. Evidently, I had a nervous breakdown at the age of 10. My mother said my behavior was rather erratic, crawling on the floor and things. I don't remember. My mother did take me to a doctor and I guess a psychiatrist, and the remedy was to lie in bed for 3 months. Now, I never went to school all during the war. I started school the first grade at 9.5 years old, and now 6 months later, I'm back in bed for a number of months. But somehow I recovered. It took me a long time to even speak about those years during the war and the years after the war, trying to come to terms with all these things I experienced as a child and not having had the help to go through it. And I think that's with many child survivors. I came to the United States and I learned to speak English well. Nobody asked me, oh, where are you from? Because I don't have much of an accent. So it wasn't until something that I saw where someone said that there were never any concentration camps, it was all propaganda, that I decided I had to speak. And when you start to speak of these experiences in the past, it is like a DVD running, because you're now describing something, but you're seeing it at the same, as you're describing it, you're reliving it. I came here in 1950 and I didn't start to speak until 1981. So it took me 31 years to come to terms with some of these things. It's so hard to figure out what all went through my mind at that time, because I was so young, and you try to cope with it every day. All I know is that I went to bed every night and prayed, because they were very religious. And I prayed every night in my prayers that I would live another day, that they wouldn't find us. It was a fear that I had. And I think more than anything, knowing that if I messed up, it would be my fault. If I forgot my name or I said something from the past, that fear was with me for a long time. And then the nightmares after the war, and waking up in the middle of the night, having these nightmares of living through it again and again and again. That took many, many years to pass. So many lies out there and people believing things that aren't true and then spreading it. And that really bothers me so much. I bring a message to students. Yes, I talk about the war, but how people cared, how important that was, because it didn't matter that I was Jewish and they were Christians. We were human beings. Put your arm around someone and they may be a different race, or they may have purple hair, or look different than you do, or speak a different language, or speak with an accent, and embrace each other. That to me is so important, more than anything. We're all human beings, and I tell kids too, I said, you know what, no matter what we look like or act like, inside we're all the same.